A dusty letter, written in 1985, arrives at Keanu Reeves' foundation, meant for a soldier long dead. Inside, a secret, a child named after him. Keanu opens the envelope and uncovers a story buried for 4 decades. But what he finds at the end of it will break your heart. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. It was late afternoon at the Reeves Foundation office in Los Angeles, and the building had gone quiet. Outside the windows, the sun slanted low, casting long shadows across the floor. Keanu sat at his desk, a mug of untouched tea beside him, slowly going through the day's mail. It was something he liked to do himself from time to time. He didn't announce it or ask for help, it just grounded him, sorting through the envelopes, touching the ink, and feeling the weight of people's words in his hands. Most of the letters were familiar, thank yous from veterans his foundation had helped, a few donation requests, and some from fans. Long, emotional messages about how his movies or presence had meant something during a hard time. He read them all. Always had, always would. But then he noticed something different. Near the bottom of the stack was an envelope that looked older than the rest. The paper was yellowed and thin, the corners curled slightly. The ink on the front was faded, the kind you only saw on postcards from the 70s or something, rescued from a long-forgotten drawer. There was no return address, just a name typed across the center. Michael Reeves, /O, Veteran Outreach. Keanu's breath caught. He turned the envelope slowly, almost reverently, and looked at the postmark. 1985? He blinked, reading it again to be sure. It wasn't a misprint. It was a postmark from 40 years ago. Somehow, this letter had been caught in limbo, misfiled, misplaced, or lost in a system that had long since forgotten the sender and the recipient. Michael Reeves. Keanu hadn't heard his father's name spoken aloud in years. He hadn't even seen it written in a long time. And now, here it was, staring up at him from the middle of a dusty envelope that had no business surviving 4 decades. He slowly reached for the letter opener, but then paused. The paper looked like it might disintegrate with the wrong touch. So he slid his finger gently under the flap and lifted it. Inside was a single sheet of stationery, cream-colored, creased from decades of waiting. The handwriting was delicate but clear, written in blue ink. It began with just 2 words. Dear Michael. Keanu leaned forward, drawn in before he even knew why. He read slowly, eyes moving line by line across the fragile page. I never heard back. I don't blame you, the letter began. We were young and the world was complicated. You were already in uniform when I found out. I didn't want to burden you, but I couldn't keep it to myself either. Keanu felt his throat tighten. His fingers gripped the edges of the paper, careful not to smudge the ink. I had the baby, Michael. A boy. I named him after you. The words hit like a sudden wind, gentle in tone but with the weight of a tidal wave. I told myself I'd write again when he was older, but I didn't. Maybe I was scared. Maybe I just didn't want to hope for something that was never coming. He asks about you sometimes. I tell him only that you were brave, and that's enough. But I hope someday this finds you, even if you never answer. I wanted you to know. He exists. There was no anger in the writing, no accusation, just a deep current of longing that hadn't aged with the ink. At the bottom of the page there was a name, June Whitaker, and underneath it, faint and almost missed, a final line, who deserves to know where he comes from. Keanu set the letter down, staring out the window as the sky darkened into early evening. His mind was no longer in the office. It was back in his childhood, back to nights spent waiting for a man who rarely came home, and even when he did, left more questions than comfort. Michael Reeves. Keanu had rarely spoken of his father. Even as an adult, he carried the distance like a sealed box in his heart. Some things you accept as mysteries, parts of your story that remain unfinished. But now, in his hand, he held a forgotten chapter that wasn't even his. Was it really possible? Had his father fathered another child in secret? And if so, what happened to that boy? Keanu read the letter again, slower this time. Every line seemed to reach across time, not to his father, but to him. A quiet plea left unanswered for 40 years, now suddenly in his lap. He didn't know what he was feeling: grief, guilt, curiosity. But beneath it all was a single truth pulsing in his chest. Someone out there might still be waiting. Keanu stood and walked to the back wall of the foundation office, where old photos of his childhood were pinned among news clippings and notes of gratitude from those helped by his quiet efforts over the years. A small black and white image of his father, unbuttoned, arms crossed on the hood of a car, stared back at him from decades ago. He reached for it. "Michael Reeves," he whispered, trying the name on his tongue like it was foreign. Not just the man, but now, the child, the echo. A knock on the door pulled him back. Sophia, his longtime friend and advisor, poked her head in. "Still here?" she asked gently. He nodded. "You ever get something you didn't ask for, but can't ignore?" Sophia stepped inside, sensing the weight in his voice. "You okay?" He held up the letter. "This was meant for my father, but it found me." She read the address and paused. "Is this real?" "I think so. Do you want to know?" Keanu folded the letter carefully, sliding it back into the brittle envelope. "I don't know what I want," he said honestly, "but I know what he might need." She nodded. "Then, that's where we start." They didn't say anything more. The moment didn't need words, just presence. Keanu stared at the envelope on the table between them, a message frozen in time. A boy named after a man who never received it, a life lived without answers. He wondered what it would mean to uncover those missing years, to chase shadows in hopes of finding something whole. But the thing about unanswered letters is this: even decades later, they still deserve to be read. And sometimes, if you're lucky, they arrive just in time to change everything. The next morning, before the sun fully breached the Los Angeles skyline, Keanu sat alone in the records room of his foundation's private archive. A storage unit in the back had become a kind of memorial, not just to his father, but to a past that Keanu had never fully made peace with. Cardboard boxes labeled in faded Sharpie. One read, "Michael Reeves, Military Service." It was heavy. Dust clung to the edges like grief that hadn't been cleaned up. Keanu opened it slowly. Inside were a few medals, a dog-eared copy of the things they carried, 2 tarnished dog tags, and a stack of yellowing documents clipped together with rusted binder rings. Deployment records, honor citations, brief notes scribbled by his father's commanding officers. There was even an old matchbook from a diner in Fort Hood, Texas, marked 1984. His breath caught. Texas. June's letter had been postmarked from a small town just outside Killeen. He flipped further through the documents, looking for something, anything, that mentioned her name. A letter, a photo, a scribbled note. But there was nothing. Just clean paperwork, official signatures, and impersonal lines that marked the movements of a man who'd been elusive his whole life. He leaned back against the wall, the file still open in his lap. The silence in the room wasn't peaceful. It was loud in its absence of answers. Sophia walked in quietly, holding 2 coffees. She set one beside him and didn't say anything at first. That's what made her presence comforting. She never tried to fill the silence unless he asked her to. After a few minutes, she spoke softly. "Find anything?" "Nothing useful," he said, shaking his head. "But the location matches." She sat across from him on the cold tile floor, crossing her legs like they were 2 kids hiding out after curfew. "That doesn't mean it's true," she said. Keanu looked up at her. "What if it is?" Sophia hesitated. "Then what?" "I don't know," he admitted. "But if there's someone out there who thinks they were forgotten, if they've lived their whole life wondering why their father never showed up, Don't they deserve to know it wasn't abandonment? Her voice was gentle but firm. What if you don't find anything? What if it's a dead end? Keanu stared at the old matchbook in his hand, running his thumb over the tiny print. Then at least I tried, he said, because if it were me, I'd want to know. Sophia reached out and touched his arm. She didn't argue. She knew what this meant to him. Not just the mystery of the letter, but everything it stirred up inside. The past doesn't knock, it slips in, quietly. And once it's inside, it demands to be heard. Keanu spent the rest of the afternoon in the Foundation's small research office, tracing old directories, military base records, and even scanning local yearbooks from towns surrounding Fort Hood. Sophia had pulled up a laptop beside him, and together they followed every small lead, quietly, methodically, without expectation. But the longer they searched, the more Keanu felt something rising in his chest. Not frustration, not even grief. It was responsibility. Every now and then, he'd glance back at the letter June had written. Her handwriting was delicate, curled at the edges of each sentence, like someone who once wrote with hope, but had long since learned how to write through disappointment. There was one line that stuck out more than the others. Has your eyes. He stares out the window like he's waiting for someone. Keanu reread it more times than he could count, not because he didn't understand it, but because he did. Too well. He finally leaned back in his chair and whispered, "He's real." Sophia looked up from the screen. "You really believe that?" "I do." She closed her laptop. "Then what's the next step?" Keanu picked up the envelope again, turning it over between his fingers. "I think we start with June." He took a breath, as if steadying himself for a fall he'd already decided to jump into. She might not be alive anymore, but someone remembers her. A hospital, a post office, maybe a neighbor. Someone. Sophia nodded slowly, watching the way he gripped the letter like it held more than words. "You know this might stir things up in ways you can't undo." Keanu looked at her, and for a moment, the room grew still. "I'm not trying to rewrite the past," he said. "I just want to honor it." She didn't smile, but her expression softened. That was the Keanu she believed in. The man who didn't chase drama or headlines, but who couldn't ignore the quiet truths hiding in the corners of other people's lives. She slid a notepad toward him. "Let's start listing what we know." As he began writing, a strange kind of clarity settled over him. This wasn't about his father anymore. I think this was about a boy who might still be waiting by the window 40 years later, never knowing the letter was written, never knowing someone tried to reach him, and maybe still waiting to be found. Later that evening, Keanu returned home with the letter tucked carefully inside a worn leather journal. He didn't read it again. He didn't have to. The words had etched themselves into his memory, not just for what they said, but for what they didn't. The missing years, the unanswered silence. He lit a small candle by the window, something he did when wrestling with his thoughts. Its soft flicker seemed to echo the one fragile truth, now unraveling everything. Someone out there had been left behind. He picked up his phone and called Sophia. "Can you get me access to any public records from Temple, Texas, dated around May 1985? There was a pause, then her steady voice answered, "Already started." He smiled faintly. Sophia had a way of staying one step ahead. After ending the call, he walked over to his bookshelf and pulled out a slim file marked Michael Reeves Military Archives. It had been left untouched for years, more a relic of memory than anything useful. He opened it slowly now, scanning the yellowing pages, service awards, discharge forms, and deployment orders. There, he found it. A 6-month assignment in Fort Hood, Texas, during early 1985. The timeline aligned. He stared at the document for a long time. For most of his life, the name Michael Reeves had meant something distant, abstract. A shadow, a mistake, a wound too complicated to examine. But now, for the first time, Keanu wondered if his father had left more than silence behind. Maybe he hadn't run away entirely. Maybe someone had tried to reach him. Maybe life had tried to circle back. He closed the folder gently. This wasn't about guilt anymore. It was about presence. Keanu sat down at his desk, turned on the lamp, and opened a new notepad. At the top, he wrote, June, Temple, Tex, 1985, and underneath it, Michael Jr. If he's out there, we find him, not to fix the past, but to tell him he was never truly forgotten. Then he underlined the last sentence, folded the paper, and slid it beside the candlelight. Outside the window, the night deepened. But for the first time in years, it didn't feel empty. The morning light filtered through the blinds as Keanu sat quietly at the kitchen table, the envelope still resting beside his coffee mug. He hadn't slept much. That letter, 40 years late, was now impossible to ignore. He kept rereading June's words, searching for more between the lines. He didn't know her, but something about the way she wrote, the way she spoke directly to his father, made it feel urgent, honest, real. Sophia entered, holding a laptop. I ran a scan on voter records like you asked, she said softly, handing it over. June Hadley, voted in Deschutes County, Oregon. The last entry was 2004. Keanu's eyes flicked to the next detail. Date of death, June 2, 2004. 20 years ago, Sophia whispered. There was no mention of family, no survivors listed, nothing about a son, no trace of Michael Jr. Keanu leaned back in his chair, breathing slow. She passed away not even 2 hours from where I filmed part of that indie road trip project. She must have carried this her whole life, Sophia said. And no one ever answered her, Keanu replied. He found her obituary online. It was short, tucked away in a small local newspaper's archive, but one sentence stood out. She was preceded in death by her parents and is survived by Mike Carson, fostered and raised by James and Lila Carson of Redmond. Mike Carson, Keanu said aloud. Not Reeves, Sophia added, so the boy wasn't raised by her. Keanu clicked through to census records, city directory logs, anything that might place this new name. Mike Carson. There was one hit, a utility record from a year ago. A water bill connected to a rural address outside Redmond, Oregon, a place marked as Carson Woodworks. Could be him, Sophia said. That's not exactly a common coincidence. Keanu stood. I need to go. She touched his arm. Are you sure? You don't even know if he's your relative. I know he was named after my father, Keanu said, his voice steady. And if I was him, I'd want someone to care enough to come find me. Sophia didn't argue. Keanu folded the letter once more and tucked it gently into his jacket pocket. Then he left for Oregon. The drive up to Oregon was long, filled with silence and the low hum of tires on wet pavement. Keanu didn't listen to music. He needed to feel every mile. The landscapes changed around him, from city skylines to rolling forested hills, as if the road itself was slowly pulling him away from Hollywood and into something deeper, older, more human. He passed the Welcome to Redmond sign just before sunset. The town was quiet, framed by tall pines and open fields. It had the feel of a place where not much changed, where stories were passed through calloused hands, not headlines. Carson Woodworks was listed just off a back road about 10 miles out. Keanu turned onto a gravel path that crunched under his tires. At the end stood a modest workshop, its front porch adorned with hand-carved benches and a swinging sign shaped like an axe. He parked, but didn't get out right away. Instead, he sat and watched. A man stepped out onto the porch. Mid-40s, stocky, short-cropped hair, worn flannel shirt with sawdust on the sleeves. He held a mug in one hand and looked out over the trees like it was a ritual. Keanu didn't need confirmation. He felt it in his chest. This was him, Michael Jr., raised by strangers, shaped by silence, and named after the man who never knew he existed. Keanu stepped out of the car slowly, careful not to startle him. But the man turned anyway, sensing the presence. "Can I help you?" the man asked. Keanu paused, his voice soft, respectful. "I'm just passing through. Saw your shop online, thought I'd stop by." The man studied him for a long second. "You're Keanu Reeves." Keanu nodded slightly. "Sometimes." Michael Jr. gave a slow, almost tired smile. "Well, you're a long way from L." "I am. What brings you this far off the map?" Keanu hesitated. He didn't pull out the letter, not yet. Instead, he said the one thing that felt honest: curiosity, and maybe something more. Michael Jr. tilted his head. "You want to come in?" Keanu nodded. "If you don't mind." The man opened the door to the workshop, and the warm scent of cedar and varnish greeted him like an old story waiting to be told. Inside, the walls were lined with handcrafted pieces, tables, chairs, delicate carved animals, and plaques with scripture quotes and local sports logos. It was a life built with hands, not headlines. A life shaped by effort. Michael Jr. poured 2 cups of coffee from an old percolator. "I don't get many visitors," he said, handing one over. Keanu accepted it with a nod. "I don't visit many people like this either." They sat on stools facing a worn workbench. For a while they talked about wood, about Oregon, about how winters hit harder the older you got. But Keanu's eyes kept drifting to a framed photo on a shelf behind the man. 2 older people smiling beside a boy with a cast on his arm. Foster parents. A childhood. "That you?" Keanu asked gently. Michael Jr. followed his gaze. "Yeah, James and Lila, good folks. They did the best they could." "Do you know anything about your birth parents?" Keanu asked. Michael Jr. shrugged. "Not really. Got told I was left with social services when I was a baby. No names, no real trail. I stopped wondering after a while." Keanu reached into his jacket. He unfolded the letter carefully. He placed it on the bench between them. "She wrote this in 1985, he said quietly. "Addressed to a Michael Reeves." Michael Jr.'s hand trembled slightly as he picked it up. He scanned the page. His breath hitched on the line. "I named him after you." His voice cracked. "Who was she?" "June Hadley," Keanu said. "She passed away 20 years ago." Michael Jr. blinked fast, jaw tightening. "And the man, Michael Reeves?" Keanu met his eyes. "My father. He never got the letter." Michael Jr. sat back. "So he never left me, he just never knew I existed." Keanu nodded, the weight of truth settling between them. The workshop grew still. Outside, the trees swayed in the wind like silent witnesses to a story finally being heard. Inside, 2 men sat across a simple workbench, neither speaking for a while, but everything had already been said. One letter, 40 years late, but right on time. The town of Redmond, Oregon, sat quiet under a sky that looked bruised with early autumn clouds. Keanu had driven hours with no GPS, just a hand-drawn map from a local clerk who barely looked up when he asked for directions. The quiet hum of the engine was the only sound as he parked across from a dusty storefront with a weathered sign that read, "Carson's Bike and Repair." He didn't move at first. He simply sat, hands resting on the steering wheel, eyes fixed on the shop like it might vanish if he blinked. It looked exactly like the kind of place you'd miss if you weren't paying attention. A faded Coca-Cola sign dangled above the entrance, and an old Schwinn frame hung in the window beside a stack of tire tubes. Inside there was movement. A man, tall, lean, mid-40s, wore a sweat-darkened cap and a gray t-shirt streaked with grease. He moved around the shop like he belonged there, confident but not loud, steady hands, clean rhythm. No rush in his gestures, just purpose. He adjusted handlebars, balanced wheels, and checked air pressure with the kind of care reserved for things that mattered. Keanu recognized him instantly. Michael Carson. Born Michael Reeves, Jr., though he didn't know it. He hadn't approached, not yet. From the records, Keanu knew the man had been fostered at age 2 by a couple named James and Lila Carson. They'd passed a few years back. The boy had stayed in Redmond, turned into a man the town respected, the kind of person who repaired more than bikes. As Keanu watched, a young boy no older than 10 came stumbling up to the shop, wheeling a bent bike and trying hard not to cry. Mike squatted down, examined the damage, and began working. No clipboard, no charge, just compassion. His lips moved, probably a joke or something light, and after a few quiet moments the boy's shoulders relaxed. When he tried to offer a crumpled $5 bill, Mike refused. He tapped the boy's shoulder and sent him on his way. The boy laughed, smiling. The wheel turned smooth. Keanu watched, his breath stuck in his chest. This wasn't just kindness. This was legacy, passed down unknowingly. A son shaped by no blood, no name, but still. There it was. That same stillness, that same strength, and that same ache Keanu had carried his whole life. He reached into his pocket, the letter still folded, soft with age. He didn't get out of the car. Not yet. Keanu took a seat on a quiet bench near the corner of the block, just across from the bike shop. He kept a low profile, hood up, cap pulled down, blending in with the early morning hum of the small Oregon town. It wasn't the kind of place where people expected a movie star to show up, and that anonymity offered him the quiet he needed. Through the large garage-style doors of the shop, he saw Michael Jr. again. Mike Carson, as the town knew him. He wore a dark apron smeared with grease, a pencil tucked behind one ear, and a quiet focus in everything he did. He didn't bark orders. He didn't rush. He just listened, nodded, and fixed what was broken. A little boy came by with a bike missing a pedal. Mike knelt down, examined it, and gave a soft smile. Keanu couldn't hear the words, but the boy's face lit up as Mike let him hold a wrench and help turn the screws. When they were done, Mike gave the handlebars a final squeeze and sent the kid off with a gentle pat on the back. No money exchanged, just a smile and a wave. It was the smallest gesture, but it hit Keanu like a punch to the chest. This was a man who had grown up without answers, without the name that could have changed everything. And still, he had chosen kindness, dignity, integrity. Keanu looked down at the worn envelope in his pocket, the one addressed to his father, postmarked 1985. He hadn't opened it again that morning, but the words were etched into him now. The closing line, in June's handwriting, echoed in his mind. "I named him after you." How different might life have been if Michael Reeves had received this letter, if June had found a way to get through, if Mike had grown up with even a piece of that truth. Keanu's hands rested on his knees. He didn't move. He didn't need to. He was watching something sacred, not a reunion, not yet. Just a moment, a window into a man's character, a glimpse of what was passed down, not through words or presence, but maybe something deeper, something unnamed. Mike laughed as the boy waved from the end of the block, then turned back into the garage. Keanu exhaled slowly. He wasn't ready to reveal the letter, but he was getting closer. Later that afternoon, Keanu wandered into a nearby coffee shop. It was a quiet, family-owned place with mismatched chairs and an honesty jar beside the register. He ordered black coffee, took a seat near the window, and from there he could still see the bike shop's open bay doors. He didn't pull out his phone, didn't text Sophia. He just watched, observed, reflected. Mike had a rhythm to his day. After helping a pair of teenage boys patch a tube and explaining how not to overinflate it, he leaned against the doorframe, sipping water from a dented thermos. He waved to an elderly man on a walker who passed by. The man didn't wave back, but Mike's smile didn't waver. A little while later, a woman in scrubs pulled up in a dusty sedan. She stepped out with exhaustion on her face and handed Mike a toddler seat detached from the back of a bicycle. One of the straps had broken. Keanu saw Mike crouch down, inspect the fabric, nod slowly. He didn't upsell, didn't shake his head. He said something kind, held the seat gently, like it was something worth fixing. It reminded Keanu of someone, not his father, but maybe who his father could have been in another life. The thought hit harder than he expected. Mike turned at one point, briefly, as if sensing someone watching. Their eyes didn't meet. Keanu looked down, pretending to stir his coffee. The moment passed. But Keanu's heart raced. Because for a split second, the resemblance had been undeniable. Not just physical, though there was something in the posture, the way Mike tilted his head, that echoed old photos of his father from decades ago. It was something else. Something in the way he moved through the world. Unassuming, grounded, present. Keanu finished his coffee, paid with a 20 and left the change. As he walked past the shop one final time that day, he didn't stop. But he looked back once, and quietly whispered to himself, he deserves to know. The decision was forming. Not today, but soon. He would introduce himself, not as an actor, not as a messenger, but as someone ready to tell him the truth. Keanu sat quietly at a corner booth of the only open diner in town, the kind with worn red leather seats and faded jukebox buttons that hadn't worked in years. He sipped his coffee slowly, his gaze drifting between the fogged-up window and the people inside. This wasn't Hollywood. No one cared who he was here. He preferred it that way. He'd told the waitress, a gray-haired woman with a soft accent and a sharp memory, that he was writing a human interest piece on fatherless men who built meaningful lives. That phrase, crafted in the quiet of a motel room the night before, struck the exact tone he needed. Curious, empathetic, vague enough not to raise suspicion. The waitress, Irene, leaned over his table with a fresh pot of coffee. "You want to talk to someone who fits your story?" she asked, voice low. Keanu looked up, his eyes calm. "Yes." She glanced toward the window. "That man you were watching at the bike shop yesterday. Mike? He's the one." Keanu nodded but didn't press. Irene continued. "He's lived here most his life, came as a foster kid. Carson family raised him. Salt of the earth types, but they were getting older even then. Mike was about 10, I think." She paused, wiping her hands on her apron. "He never talked about where he came from, not much anyway. Used to ask about his birth mother once or twice when he was real young, but then he just stopped." Keanu wrote quietly, not wanting to interrupt the rhythm of memory. Irene added, "You know what I always noticed? He'd help everyone. Fix a tractor, unclog a drain, give away his lunch if someone looked hungry. But there's always been this quiet sadness in him. Like he was waiting for someone he didn't know how to look for." Keanu closed his notebook slowly. That mirrored something deep in his own bones, that feeling of being untethered, of carrying someone else's silence like it was your own. "I appreciate you telling me this," Keanu said gently. Irene smiled. "Whatever you're looking for, you'll find it in him. Just don't wait too long." Keanu stared down at the last drops of coffee. He didn't need a script. He needed to listen. Keanu left the diner and walked down Main Street slowly, keeping his hood up, his steps quiet. The town had a rhythm to it. Early risers, soft chatter, the smell of fresh sawdust and damp pine clinging to the morning air. He wasn't just observing anymore. He was feeling it. He found himself in front of a barber shop tucked between a hardware store and a gas station. Through the glass, he saw two older men talking while one trimmed the other's hair. Keanu stepped inside and waited. The barber noticed him. "You lost?" he joked. Keanu smiled faintly. "No. Actually, I'm here talking to folks about men who grew up without fathers. I'm a writer." The man in the chair, his face lined with decades of wisdom and wear, raised an eyebrow. "Well, you might want to ask about Mike Carson." Keanu nodded. "I've heard his name. What's he like?" The barber, whose name tag read George, leaned back. "That boy's the reason half this town's bikes are still rolling. He's good with tools, better with kids. But he's quiet. Real quiet. Never brought up where he came from." The man in the chair chimed in. "He used to ask questions years ago. Would show up at the library asking if anyone knew how to search birth records. Then one day he just stopped. Said he was fine not knowing." George added, "He isn't angry. He just lives, like there's a door in him that never opens. Those words stuck. Keanu thanked them and stepped back outside. Later that day, he visited the local elementary school. He had no reason, just instinct. On a bulletin board by the front desk was a hand-drawn thank you card. "Thank you, Mr. Mike, for fixing my scooter," with a child's drawing of a man kneeling next to a smiling kid. He lingered on that image. This man, Michael Jr., had been building more than bikes all these years. He'd been building himself. Out of absence. Keanu thought of June's letter. "I named him after you." Michael Reeves Sr. hadn't known. The letter had never reached him. But maybe, just maybe, Michael Jr. could still receive what his father never could give. Keanu returned to his motel with more than notes. He carried the weight of a man who had grown strong without knowing the roots he came from, and something inside him whispered, "It's almost time." The next morning, Keanu stood near the park across from the repair shop. Mike was unlocking the side door, juggling a cup of coffee and a set of keys. A teenage girl on a skateboard rolled up beside him. Her board had a cracked tail and the trucks squeaked with every turn. "Morning, Mr. Mike," she said. "It's worse again." Mike crouched to inspect it. "You keep doing those nosedives, Ellie, and one day this board's gonna quit on you." She laughed. "Then, I guess you'll have to rescue me." He waved her inside, promising to take a look. No charge, of course. From his vantage point, Keanu caught it all. The ease, the kindness, the way Mike listened like each word mattered. There was no pretense, no bitterness, just a man quietly filling in the gaps that life had left in others, while carrying his own, still unspoken. Later, Keanu walked into a nearby bookstore. A handwritten sign by the register read, "Support local heroes. Ask Mike Carson about his free bike tune-up days." The owner, a woman in her 60s, noticed Keanu looking. "Who won't say it, but he's one of the best men we've got," she said. "But he walks around like he owes someone an apology." Keanu paused. "Why do you think that is?" She shrugged. "Maybe because he never got to ask the questions he needed answers to." Keanu nodded slowly. The town loved Mike, not for any title or fame, but for how he made them feel. And yet beneath all that was a man who still wondered why no one had ever come looking for him. Now someone had. And Keanu knew the time for distance was ending. The morning fog still hung low over the hills when Keanu rolled into the gravel lot outside the bike repair shop. The quiet hum of the engine faded as he turned the key, letting the silence settle in around him. He pulled off his helmet and looked toward the wide garage bay. There, with grease-smudged hands and a calm focus, stood Michael Jr. Keanu had already seen him in action from a distance. Kind, patient, good with people. But this was different. This time, he wasn't observing from behind a windshield or across the street. This time, he was walking straight into the unknown. Mike didn't look up right away. He was finishing a repair for a teenage boy with a battered BMX bike. The kid, barely 13, stood to the side with wide eyes as Mike adjusted the chain and checked the frame. When he finished, he patted the seat and said, "Give it a go." The boy hopped on and pedaled in a tight circle, beaming. "You didn't charge him," Keanu said, as Mike turned to him. Mike shrugged. "He'll remember that more than I would have missed the $20. Keanu smiled gently and wheeled his own motorcycle forward. "Got a slow rattle I can't place. Maybe you can." Mike nodded, stepping closer. "Let's take a look." They worked in comfortable quiet for a while. Keanu watched the younger man's hands, steady, deliberate. There was something almost meditative in the way he moved, like he was fixing more than machines. Maybe he was. "So?" Mike said casually, breaking the quiet. "You passing through?" "Kind of," Keanu answered. "Needed a breath. Found your shop by accident." "Most of the best things come that way," Mike replied, half smiling. Keanu sat on a nearby crate while Mike ducked under the frame of the bike. "You work alone?" he asked. Mike nodded. "Yeah. Town's small. Folks know where to find me if they need something." "Must be nice," Keanu said. That kind of quiet? Mike paused, wiping his hands. Quiet's good, most of the time. But sometimes it makes you wonder if anything loud ever meant something to begin with. Keanu looked at him. There was more behind that line than just a poetic streak. He could feel it, an echo of the letter he still carried in his pocket. Keanu leaned back slightly, arms resting on his knees. That's a heavy thought. Mike chuckled, almost embarrassed. Sorry, I don't usually talk like that. Must be the weather. No, Keanu said softly. It's good. Feels honest. Mike tightened a bolt and stood. You ever feel like you were born with someone missing? Like there was supposed to be a voice in your life that never quite made it in time? Keanu's breath caught. He kept his tone light. Yeah. More than once. Mike nodded. I was adopted. Good people. Real salt-of-the-earth types. But I always had this itch, like my story started before they got to me, and no one ever handed me the first few pages. Keanu looked at him, really looked, the slope of his shoulders, the quiet way he took up space. He could see the reflection of another man in this younger face. And more than that, he saw the ghost of a missing chapter. You ever go looking? Keanu asked. Mike glanced toward the open road beyond the shop. Tried, once, a few years back. Got a name, June. That's all. The trail ran cold. Guess I figured it was better not knowing than digging up something I couldn't live with. Keanu nodded slowly. Sometimes the truth waits for the right person to find it. Mike smiled, brushing off his hands. Yeah, or maybe it just gets tired of being buried. He reached for a rag to wipe the sweat from his forehead, then walked over to a small fridge. Want a soda? On the house. Keanu took it with a grateful nod. They sat on stools beside the open garage door, the breeze carrying the faint scent of pine and distant rain. You know, Mike said after a few quiet moments, I used to dream a man would show up one day, some stranger who'd tell me the truth, not to fix anything, just to finally tell me where I came from. Keanu's throat tightened. And now, I don't dream about him anymore, Mike said, looking down. But sometimes I wonder if he ever looked for me. Keanu turned away just slightly, the ache in his chest tightening. In his pocket, the letter from June was still folded, warm from his hand. I think, Keanu said gently, maybe he did. Mike looked at him then, not sharply, just long enough to notice something unspoken pass between them. But neither said a word. The wind picked up as the sun dipped lower behind the hills, casting long shadows across the cracked pavement outside the shop. Keanu finished the last sip of his soda and set the can down beside him, listening to the gentle clink of tools in the distance as Mike cleaned up the workbench. You heading out soon? Mike asked casually, tossing a towel onto the counter. Keanu hesitated. Yeah, but I think I'll be back through. Mike gave a faint nod. Well, if the bike needs anything, I'm usually here. Keeps me grounded, I guess. Keanu stood, brushing off his jeans. Thanks for the help today. Mike extended a hand. Anytime, man. Ride safe. Their handshake lingered just a second too long, just enough for something unspoken to flicker in the space between them again. Something Keanu could feel but wasn't ready to name. Not yet. He turned toward his motorcycle, then paused, hand resting on the throttle. Mike? Yeah? Keanu looked back over his shoulder, eyes gentle. You ever think some people walk into your life at the exact moment you're ready for the truth? Mike tilted his head, brow furrowed. I think maybe some truths wait for you to be strong enough to hear them. Keanu smiled, the weight of the letter still pressing against his chest like a heartbeat he hadn't known he was carrying. Yeah, I think so too. He started the engine, the rumble breaking the silence, and pulled away slowly, his reflection shrinking in the shop window, while Mike stood alone just inside, watching him go. Neither of them knew exactly what came next, but both felt it. Something had shifted, and soon the truth would no longer be able to wait. Keanu sat in the quiet of his study, the Oregon mountains fading into dusk outside the wide windows. The conversations with Michael Jr. still echoed in his mind, not just the words, but the weight behind them. He thought about that boy fixing bikes in silence, carrying questions he never had answers for, questions that had shaped his entire life. Keanu opened his laptop and stared at the blinking cursor. He wasn't ready to tell the world everything, not yet, but the story, even in its shadows, needed to breathe. He typed a simple headline: "What if a forgotten letter could change everything?" Then, slowly, he began writing. It wasn't about fame. It wasn't about solving anything. It was about honoring the ache in Michael's voice, the longing for roots, for truth, for something real. The post didn't mention names or places, no photos, no drama, just reflections. Some stories don't begin with a hero or a villain. Some begin with silence, a letter misplaced, a name never spoken. I met a man who's lived his life between questions, who builds things with his hands because the world didn't build much for him. I don't know if the truth will heal him, but I know silence won't. Keanu hit post without overthinking it. He didn't promote it, didn't link it anywhere, just closed the lid of his laptop and went to sleep. The next morning, the post had a few hundred likes. By noon, it had thousands. By evening, it had exploded. People from all over the country began sharing their own unfinished chapters, stories of unknown fathers, birth mothers they never met, adopted children lost in paper trails, and names they'd whispered into empty spaces. One comment read, "My mom told me my father died in Vietnam. I never believed her. I'm 54 now, still wondering if he's out there." Another, "I found out at 38 that I was adopted. My real dad's name is Michael too. I've never had the courage to look. Maybe it's time." The stories multiplied, and with each comment, Keanu realized this wasn't just about Michael Jr. It was about millions of people carrying invisible scars, stories buried under decades of silence. This wasn't about closure. It was about connection. The comments kept pouring in, each one more raw than the last. Some were just a sentence, others were whole paragraphs, typed in shaky bursts of memory and longing. I kept a picture of a man I was told was my dad. Found out years later it was a stranger. My real father died before I could find him. But I still talk to that photo every day. I'm adopted, no records, just a hospital name and a single note. "She loved you." That's all I have. That's all I've held on to. One woman wrote, "When I was little, my grandmother told me my dad was a bad man and that's why he left. When she passed, I found a shoebox of letters. He wrote to me every birthday. I never got one, but he never forgot." Keanu scrolled through each one. No names, no headlines, just humanity. He copied several quotes and pinned them under his original post, writing only, "You are not alone." Then something unexpected happened. An old Marine sergeant shared the blog with the caption, "Someone tell Keanu he just started a movement without meaning to." Veterans forums began discussing it, linking the letter story with real-life cases of misfiled family notifications, lost military mail, even delayed adoptions due to base relocations. One retired postal worker commented, "We used to find undelivered letters in old crates during office cleanouts. Some were 10, 20 years late. We'd try to deliver them anyway. Some changed lives, others reopened wounds." A public defender from Oregon shared the post, writing, "Half my clients don't know where they came from. The system gave them numbers, not stories. Thank you for reminding us what we're fighting for." Michael Jr. hadn't seen the post yet. Keanu hadn't told him. He wanted to give the man time, space, a fair shot at choosing the truth on his own terms. But deep down, Keanu knew this viral spark was already reshaping something bigger than any one story. This wasn't a publicity stunt. It was a mirror, one that let people see their silence, then give it a voice. That night, Keanu printed the blog and folded it into an envelope. On the front, he simply wrote, "Michael, when you're ready." Then he walked it down to the repair shop himself. Michael was locking up the repair shop when Keanu arrived. The sky was turning amber behind the hills, the kind of quiet dusk that made even empty streets feel personal. Keanu didn't say anything right away. He just handed Michael the envelope. Michael raised an eyebrow. "More parts to order?" Keanu half smiled. "Something like that, for after hours." Michael slipped the envelope into his jacket pocket without opening it. "You're a strange kind of customer, you know that?" Keanu laughed softly. "Yeah, I get that a lot." They stood there for a moment in the fading light, neither man in a rush to break whatever was resting between them. Then Michael spoke. "Hey, you ever get the feeling someone out there wanted you to find something, but waited until you were actually ready for it?" Keanu's throat tightened. "Yeah, I do." Michael nodded. "Sometimes I think life's just a long chain of lost messages waiting to be delivered." He tapped the jacket pocket once. "I'll read it tonight." Keanu simply nodded and stepped back toward his motorcycle. As he pulled away, Michael remained on the sidewalk, hand still in his pocket, gaze fixed on the horizon. That night, across social media, Keanu's blog post continued to ripple, sparking dialogues, uncovering old letters, connecting estranged families. And in a small house lit by a single lamp, Michael Jr. finally opened the envelope. He read the blog, the quotes, the comments. But what stopped him was the handwritten note at the end. "Sometimes we don't get to ask where we come from, but if we're lucky, we get to choose what we do with the truth. I didn't come to find you. I came to stand beside you." "Keanu?" Michael pressed the letter to his chest. No words, no sound, just the soft beat of something beginning, something real, something he didn't have to wonder about anymore. Keanu sat quietly at the long oak table in his kitchen, the letter once addressed to Michael Reeves resting open beside his laptop. He had read it so many times that the creases in the paper had nearly worn through. What started as a moment of curiosity had transformed into something heavier. Not an obligation, but something that felt sacred. Something he owed not just to the man who never received the letter, but to the person who'd been born because of it. The investigation had taken weeks. Keanu had used every quiet connection he had, people he trusted in legal circles, veteran services, and state archives. After navigating layers of bureaucratic silence, one of his lawyer friends finally called. A hushed voice saying, "I found it." The adoption record had been sealed in 1986. The child was born on March 2, 1985. His name on the birth certificate, Michael June Reeves. The mother, June Elkins. No father's signature, just a blank line, but under father's name the words had been typed. Michael Reeves. The file confirmed everything. June had surrendered her rights the following year after being hospitalized with severe pneumonia and long-term respiratory failure. With no income, no support, and no family to take in the baby, she'd been forced into a decision no mother should ever have to make. The agency kept a scanned note from her, scribbled on the inside of a folded baby album. "Please tell him I loved him. Tell him I tried." Keanu stared at the words on the screen for a long time. They were written in shaky, uneven script, probably scrawled through tears, and, in just 2 short lines, they shattered him. She hadn't just named the child after Michael out of guilt or sentiment. She had done it in hope. Hope that somehow, in some impossible way, the man she once loved would one day discover that a child existed. A child with his name. A child born in silence and raised in someone else's arms. That hope had gone unfulfilled. Until now. The rest of the scanned file included an inventory of June's personal effects from when she passed in 2004 in a hospice center in rural Oregon. There were no listed relatives. Her only visitor in 6 months had been a county social worker. But there was a box of belongings left behind, carefully stored, even as her body failed her. Inside were 5 baby photos, a soft blue knitted hat, and clippings from parenting magazines dated 1985. She had cut out advice columns on how to swaddle a baby, how to ease teething pain, how to transition from formula. She had prepared for motherhood with everything she had, even as the world gave her nothing. Keanu opened the scanned image of one photo. It showed a baby on a picnic blanket, no more than 9 months old, laughing into the sunshine. He paused and stared. The eyes were joyful, the cheeks full, the innocence overwhelming. That boy was now a man, and that man had no idea who he was. Keanu sat in the quiet corner of a small county library, surrounded by yellowed records and folders that had survived 4 decades of indifference. Across from him, a clerk handed him the final piece of the puzzle, an official birth certificate dated March 3, 1985. The child's name read Michael June Reeves. It wasn't just a confirmation. It was a collision of timelines. June had, against all odds, told the truth. Keanu stared at the document, fingertips pressing into the paper like it might disappear if he didn't hold it tightly enough. There, in faint typewriter font, was the man he'd come to know simply as Mike Carson. It was the middle name that undid him. June. Her name. Her last word of hope sealed into the one thing no one could erase. Her child's name. Keanu found himself quietly asking aloud, why didn't anyone try to find him? But he already knew the answer. The system didn't look backward. It moved forward like a bulldozer, flattening over broken lives, unanswered letters, and the kind of love that couldn't navigate paperwork. He turned over the envelope that had started it all, now tucked in his jacket pocket. He wasn't forgotten, Keanu whispered, just misfiled. He looked up and noticed the librarian watching him from the counter. She offered a gentle smile, the kind that asked no questions but understood enough. Keanu nodded in gratitude, folded the record carefully, and slid it into his backpack next to the original letter. Outside, the Oregon sky was gray but soft. The rain had stopped. Instead of driving back immediately, he took a walk through the adjacent park. Children ran through damp grass, and a teenage couple shared headphones on a bench. Life moved, unaware that a quiet miracle had just occurred inside the library's records room. As he walked, Keanu thought about June, a woman who'd written one letter, one note of longing, apology, and love, and had died, thinking it had never reached anyone. It had taken 40 years, but someone had finally read it. Keanu stopped at a small overlook facing the river, where fog drifted lazily across the surface like breath held too long. He reached into his jacket and pulled out June's original letter once more. The edges had grown soft from handling. He read the words again. I named him after you. And this time, the weight behind them sank deeper. She hadn't just named her son out of sentiment. She had preserved identity. Even in silence, even when she was alone, even when she was dying. Back at his rental car, Keanu called Sophia. Did you find him? She asked immediately, her voice calm but tinged with tension. I found the truth, Keanu said. His name is Michael June Reeves. She didn't lie. There was silence on the other end. Then Sophia exhaled softly. So, what now? Keanu didn't answer right away. He looked up toward the mountains and then down the road that led back into town, toward the bike shop, toward Michael Jr., who still had no idea of the name he was born with. I'm going to give him the letter, Keanu said. But not yet. Sophia hesitated. You sure? He's lived his whole life believing no one ever wanted him, Keanu said. The truth needs to come from someone who listens first, not someone who just delivers it like a headline. Later that evening, Keanu stood at the edge of a quiet cemetery outside Bend. He had asked around town until he found June's resting place. The stone was modest, no flowers, just a single engraving. June Evelyn Whitaker, 196220004. He knelt beside the headstone and gently placed a fresh white lily at its base. You did everything you could, he whispered. And your son is alive. He's kind, he's steady. You raised him in silence and he doesn't even know it. He stayed there for a while, letting the wind speak around him. The ache of time, of decades misaligned, pressed against him. But it didn't crush him. This wasn't just a search anymore. It was a healing. One name, one letter, one man at a time. Tomorrow, he would return to the bike shop. But tonight, Keanu let the quiet speak. Keanu sat alone in his kitchen, the letter from the adoption records spread out in front of him. The name Michael June Reeves stared back at him like a quiet truth too heavy to hold. He'd read it over a dozen times, but the weight never changed. He poured himself a cup of tea, not coffee. It was too late for something that would keep him wired. Tonight, his nerves didn't need help staying awake. The photo of June was taped to the edge of the letter. She looked young, too young to be carrying so much weight. Her smile was hopeful, but her eyes were tired. A single mother, jobless, sick, abandoned by the man she'd written to. A man who, by all evidence, had never received her letter. Keanu leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. What would I say to him? He whispered aloud. He thought about Michael Jr., about the bike shop, about the way he'd refused money from that boy with the bent wheel, the way he'd laughed when grease covered his shirt, the way he waved to every passerby on the street. That wasn't someone angry at the world. That was someone still wondering if he belonged in it. He texted Sophia. Can I talk? The dots blinked for a few seconds before her reply came through. All well. Minutes later, they sat across from each other at Keanu's dining table. The letter, the photo, the sealed records, all there. Sophia read in silence. When she finished, she didn't speak right away. She just looked up at him and studied his face, like she was trying to read what wasn't written on paper. Does he know anything? She finally asked. Keanu shook his head. No idea, but based on what I've seen, probably not. She folded her hands. Then it's yours to give, or not. I've been asking myself that exact thing, he said. Do I even have the right? I'm not his father. I'm not even his brother. I'm just a man who opened the wrong envelope. Sophia reached for the letter and tapped the name. But maybe you're the only man who can give him what's been missing. Truth. He nodded slowly, then whispered, but what if the truth hurts? More than it helps. Some truths heal, she said. Others haunt. This one might do both, but it's still his. Keanu stared down at the papers again. His fingers rested on the edges of the envelope, like he was afraid to crease it. Sophia added gently, he's a good man, Keanu. You said that yourself. If he's lived with a hole in his heart this long, don't you think he deserves to know why it was there? He nodded once more. Then his voice cracked. I just don't want to break him. Sophia reached out and placed her hand on his. Maybe you'll help him start to heal. Keanu said nothing more, but his eyes drifted to his helmet on the table. Tomorrow he would return to the bike shop. The morning was overcast as Keanu pulled into the familiar gravel lot beside the bike shop. The air carried the scent of wet pine and oil, and a thin mist clung to the ground, curling around his boots as he stepped off the bike. Inside, the place buzzed softly with the whir of tools and the low thump of a radio playing classic rock in the background. Michael Jr. stood at the far end of the shop, bent over a set of gears. His sleeves were rolled up, revealing lean, strong arms coated in black grease. Keanu watched him for a moment, just breathing, taking in the ease in Mike's movements, the small hum under his breath as he worked. It struck him how normal the moment was, how peaceful, and how it might all change in the next few minutes. Mike looked up and grinned. Back so soon? You break something again? Keanu smiled faintly. No, just wanted to check on the chain you helped me install. Mike wiped his hands and waved Keanu over. All good, bring it in. They walked out together, the bike rolling between them. As they leaned it on the stand, Mike asked, You ever wonder about where you came from? Keanu glanced sideways. More times than I can count. Mike nodded, not breaking eye contact with the gears. Me too. I used to think maybe I was dropped off like a package, no return address, just ended up where I ended up. Keanu didn't respond right away. The question wasn't casual. It carried weight. The kind of weight people only shared when they thought the other person might understand. Mike looked over at him. Ever get answers? Keanu hesitated, then said, Sometimes, but most of the time I find more questions. They sat on the bench outside the shop, the bike between them, the tools resting at their feet. Mike leaned back, letting the mist settle into his hoodie. I looked once, he said quietly, at the adoption records. They were sealed. I was 17, got angry and broke a chair when they said I couldn't know. Keanu's heart dropped. Mike went on. Stopped asking after that. Figured it didn't matter. Whoever they were, they didn't stick around. Why dig up ghosts? Keanu swallowed. Maybe because sometimes the ghosts were never meant to disappear. Mike turned to him slowly. What does that mean? The words sat on Keanu's tongue like fire, but he wasn't ready. Not yet. Instead, he said gently, I met someone who once said, even if a message is delayed, it still deserves to be delivered. Mike looked at him strangely. You always talk in riddles? Keanu smiled faintly. Only when the truth is heavy. Mike chuckled, but it faded quickly. His voice dropped. If you knew something about someone's past, would you tell them? Even if it messed everything up? Keanu looked him in the eye. If it was mine to tell? I think I'd ask them first. Are you ready to hear it? Mike stared at the ground. I don't know if I'd ever be ready. Keanu whispered, maybe you already are. The silence between them lingered like fog, thick, unspoken, and sacred. Keanu reached into his coat and pulled out a small envelope. It was worn around the edges, soft from being opened too many times. He turned it in his hands, but didn't offer it. Not yet. Mike noticed. What's that? Keanu stared at the envelope, then met Mike's eyes. A letter. From someone named June. Mike blinked. That name sounds familiar, I think. Someone at the county office mentioned it when I asked about my records, but they wouldn't tell me more. Keanu nodded slowly. She was your mother. She wrote this in 1985. Tried to send it to your father. It got lost. Or buried. Mike's face went pale. His lips parted, but no words came out. She wrote, I never heard back. I don't blame you. But I had the baby. I named him after you. Mike's hands trembled slightly. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, staring at the gravel beneath his boots. My name, Michael. All this time I thought it was random. It wasn't, Keanu said gently. It was love. Scared, imperfect but real. Mike took a long breath, then looked up at Keanu. His voice was barely a whisper. So, who was he? My father? Keanu hesitated. Then, quietly, he said, Michael Reeves. He was a soldier, stationed in Texas when he met June. He didn't abandon her. He never got the letter. He never knew. Mike closed his eyes. I hated him. For decades. I thought he left me. Hell didn't, Keanu said. He just never had the chance. Mike's voice cracked. Where is he now? Keanu paused. He passed away years ago. The words sank like stones. Mike nodded, but the hurt in his eyes didn't dim. So he never left me. He just never got the letter? Keanu placed the envelope gently on the bench between them. It's yours now. Mike picked it up slowly, hands shaking, as if holding something alive. He didn't open it yet. He just held it to his chest. They sat together in silence, two men bound by something neither had asked for, but both were changed by. After a while, Mike whispered, "Thank you." Keanu looked at him. For what? For telling me anyway, even when it could have stayed buried. Keanu nodded. Some truths hurt, but silence hurts worse. Mike finally smiled, faint but real. You ride? Keanu chuckled. Sometimes. Mike wiped his eyes and stood. Then next time, come ride with me. No secrets, just wind and road. Keanu stood too. I'd like that. As they walked back to the bike, the mist began to clear. The sky above Bend, Oregon was painted in soft autumn light when Keanu walked into the bike shop again. This time, he wasn't pretending to need a repair. His steps were heavier, more deliberate. In his hand, protected in a weathered folder, was the letter. Michael Jr. was behind the counter, adjusting the gears on a mountain bike. He looked up and smiled faintly, then paused when he noticed the intensity in Keanu's eyes. "Back again," he said, wiping his hands on a rag. "I am," Keanu replied quietly. There was a long pause between them. Keanu stepped forward and placed the folder on the counter, gently sliding it toward Michael. "What's this?" Michael asked, his brow furrowing. Keanu didn't speak at first. He just stood still, allowing the weight of the moment to settle. Finally, he said, "I found this letter. It's from someone named June." Michael's hands froze mid-reach. His face tensed. "My birth mother?" Keanu nodded. "It was written in 1985. It was never delivered. Until now." Michael's lips parted, but no words came. He slowly opened the folder, revealing the faded paper inside. As his eyes scanned the handwriting, June's handwriting, his hands began to tremble. He read silently, then whispered the words aloud. "I don't blame you. But I had the baby. I named him after you." He looked up, his voice cracked. "What is this? Why now? Why you?" Keanu met his gaze. "Because no one else ever delivered it. Because the letter finally found someone willing to carry it." Michael stepped back, shaking his head. "This doesn't make sense. None of it." "It will," Keanu said, "but only if you let it." Michael gripped the edge of the counter, his knuckles pale. "All my life I thought I was abandoned, that she gave me away, that he never existed." Keanu's voice softened. He did, and so did she. And they didn't stop caring. They were just separated by silence. Tears brimmed in Michael's eyes, but he didn't let them fall, not yet. Michael paced behind the counter, the letter trembling in his grip. The words were old, but they burned hot in his chest like fresh fire. He kept rereading the lines, as if somewhere between the faded ink and smudged curves of her penmanship, he might find something more. Some missed sentence, some clue to why everything had gone so wrong. "She wrote this before I could speak," he murmured, mostly to himself. "Before I even had a chance to know who I was." Keanu sat on the edge of a nearby bench, giving him space but not retreating. Michael finally looked up, and his voice was sharper now, tinged with pain. "Do you know what it's like to grow up feeling like you were a mistake? I was passed around, homes, schools, last names, and every time I asked who I was, no one had an answer." Keanu nodded slowly. "I don't know your exact pain, but I know what it's like to search for a man who was never there, and to wonder if maybe he was just never given the chance." Michael's hands balled into fists, then opened again. He exhaled. "She named me after him." "She did," Keanu said gently, "and she tried to reach him. This letter was her way of saying he mattered to her. You mattered to her." Michael's jaw clenched. He looked away, wiping at his eyes, then finally asked, "And him? My father? Did he ever try?" Keanu hesitated for a moment, then said, "He never got the letter. He may not have known about you at all." Michael let that settle in. A beat passed, then another. "So," he said at last, his voice quiet, "he never left me. He just never got the letter." Keanu nodded. "Sometimes the distance between people isn't measured in miles. It's measured in missed chances." Michael looked down at the letter one more time, then folded it carefully. "I don't know what to do with this," he whispered. "You don't have to know yet," Keanu replied. "Just let it live with you a while." Michael stood in the back room for a long while, staring out the dusty window toward the trees behind the shop. The letter now rested in his hands like a fragile artifact from a life that never began. His reflection stared back at him in the glass. older, heavier, marked by years of wondering. But now, for the first time, that reflection looked tethered, like it belonged to a man who'd come from somewhere real. Keanu waited, still on the bench, saying nothing. Finally, Michael stepped back into the main shop, calmer now, his voice lower. I used to think about him all the time. When I was little, I imagined he was a firefighter, or a soldier, or someone too important to come home. Keanu nodded once. Then I stopped wondering, Michael continued, because wondering hurt more than not knowing. He paused, then added, but this hurts in a different way. It hurts with hope. Keanu met his eyes. Hope isn't easy, but it's worth surviving for. Michael gave a tired laugh, then tucked the letter carefully into a drawer beneath the counter. I don't know what to do next. You don't have to, Keanu said. You just have to keep walking forward, even if it's slow. Michael studied him for a long moment. Why are you doing this? Keanu stood. He didn't speak right away. Then he said simply, because someone needed to. The two men stood in silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It was full, like something unfinished had been written at last. Outside, the wind stirred fallen leaves into quiet motion. Inside, something finally settled. The road wound through the Oregon hills like a long, patient question waiting to be answered. Keanu and Michael Jr. rode in quiet formation, engines humming, the breeze whipping through their jackets. For miles, neither of them spoke. Not at the gas station, not at the old bridge they crossed, not when they turned onto the unmarked road that curved upward through the trees. They stopped at a scenic overlook that stretched wide across the horizon. Below, a river glinted like glass, winding between pine-covered ridges. The sky was overcast, but the clouds held back the rain. Michael pulled off his helmet and stared out at the quiet vastness. Keanu stood beside him, hands tucked into his leather jacket, saying nothing. Michael spoke first, but it came out like a whisper. I've lived here my whole life. Fixed bikes, stayed out of trouble mostly. Never really thought there was more to my story than that. Keanu nodded slowly, letting the words hang. I used to make up things about who I was, Michael added, his voice a bit steadier. Told myself maybe my mom was an artist, or that my dad, maybe he just wasn't ready. Eventually I stopped imagining. It hurt too much. Keanu glanced at him, but didn't interrupt. I wasn't adopted till I was almost 4, Michael continued. Spent the first years in foster homes. The Carsons were good people, but they weren't the beginning. And I always felt that, like I came in after something broke. The wind moved through the trees around them, soft and persistent. Michael looked down at the valley. I thought maybe I was left because I wasn't worth staying for. Keanu turned toward him, his tone gentle. You weren't left. You were lost. That letter, it was a message caught in time, and it just now found the shore. Michael blinked hard, like he was trying not to let something escape. You really believe he would have wanted me? I know he would have tried, Keanu said. That matters more than we realize. They stood in silence, both of them watching the clouds break just slightly, letting a narrow beam of light fall on the river below. The two men sat down on a fallen log just off the road. The earth smelled of damp pine and old rain, grounding them in something simple and real. Keanu took a breath and broke the silence. You know, he said, I used to think forgiveness was something you earned. But I've learned that sometimes it's just something you offer, because the weight is too much to carry alone. Michael nodded, his fingers clasped tightly between his knees. I used to hate the idea of my father, not because I knew him, but because I didn't. That emptiness, it turns into anger if you let it sit too long. Keanu looked at him carefully. You ever talk to anyone about that? Michael shook his head. No point. Most people don't understand what it feels like to look in the mirror and see a question staring back. A moment passed. I used to wonder what was wrong with me, Michael added. why I couldn't hold relationships, why I'd get quiet in rooms full of people, like part of me was always waiting for something or someone. That never came. Keanu leaned forward. Maybe this is that moment, the thing you were waiting for, not to fix everything, but to name it. Michael's eyes searched the treetops as if he might find the answer written in the branches. It's strange, that letter. It should have made me feel better, but it just broke something open. Sometimes we have to break open to heal, Keanu said softly. He didn't leave you, Michael. He never even knew you existed. Michael exhaled, slow and uneven. I don't know what to do with all this. You don't have to do anything yet, Keanu replied. You don't have to become someone else. You just need to be willing to let the story change. A long pause followed, the kind that doesn't feel heavy, just honest. Then Michael asked, did he write anything else? Keanu reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded photo, the only thing that had survived with the letter. It showed a young soldier, arms around a fellow recruit, laughing mid-sentence. On the back, in faded ink, it read, "For whoever comes next, leave them more than silence." Michael held the photo with both hands. He really wrote that? Keanu nodded. That's the man who didn't know he had a son, but who still hoped someone would hear him. They rode back in silence, the motor humming beneath them as the late afternoon sky turned pale gold. At the top of a gentle ridge overlooking the Oregon Valley, Michael pulled over without saying a word. He shut off the engine, removed his helmet, and let the stillness settle between them. Keanu followed, stretching his legs as he stepped toward the edge of the overlook. The valley below glowed, speckled with distant rooftops and winding country roads. Michael stood beside him, still holding the photo Keanu had given him earlier. You know, Michael said softly, I used to imagine my father as 100 different things. A race car driver, a firefighter, a teacher who moved overseas, anything but what the truth turned out to be, that he never even got the chance. Keanu looked over, hands in his jacket pockets. The stories we create to survive, sometimes they keep us warm, sometimes they keep us lost. Michael smiled sadly. I think I needed both. Maybe I still do. He looked down at the photo again. For whoever comes next, leave them more than silence. His voice broke just a little. I guess he did, Michael whispered. Keanu said nothing. He just stood there, shoulder to shoulder with the son of a man who'd been gone for decades. Gone, but never truly absent. Michael glanced over. You really didn't have to do this. I didn't do anything, Keanu replied. I just listened when something called. Michael shook his head. No, you did more than listen. You showed up. A breeze swept across the hilltop, cool and clean. The kind of wind that carried things away. Grief, anger, the weight of years unlived, and returned something lighter in its place. Michael slipped the photo into his wallet, not for display, just to keep close. Keanu gave him a nod. You ready to head back? Michael took one last look at the valley, then at Keanu. Yeah, I think I finally know which direction that is. They got back on the bike together, and this time Michael didn't ride to escape the past. He rode to meet what was next. The rain had stopped by morning, but the world had already changed. Mike sat alone in his apartment, staring at the letter again. The paper was worn at the folds, the ink smudged slightly at the edges from where his fingers had held it too long. But the words were clear, still powerful, still impossible to forget. I named him after you because I wanted him to know love, even if he never knew you. He had read that line at least 100 times since Keanu handed him the envelope. It echoed now, not in his mind, but in something deeper. In the space where confusion used to live, where doubt used to whisper. He opened his laptop, logged into an account he rarely used. Then he typed out a short post, just the line, just the truth. No context, no tags, no names. But within minutes, people began to respond. One person commented, "I don't know why this made me cry, but it did." Another wrote, "My mom wrote me a letter when I was 14, told me why she gave me up. I kept it in my wallet for 30 years. The post exploded. Hundreds, then thousands of comments flooded in. Stories, memories, regrets, letters that were lost, letters that were found, messages sent too late, words never said at all. Keanu called him that afternoon. "You okay?" Mike let out a breath. "I think so. I just didn't expect this." "You gave people something real," Keanu replied. "They were waiting for someone to say it first." Mike looked back at the screen. There was a new message. From a woman named Elena. "My father was drafted before I was born. He never came back. But my mother used to tell me he loved me. Thank you for sharing this. It gave me something I thought I'd lost a long time ago." He sat with that. Then he got up, poured himself some water, and returned to the couch. It felt different now. Not heavier, not lighter, just grounded. He scrolled again, saw comment after comment, some just hearts, some just tears, some entire paragraphs from strangers who had carried silent grief for decades. And through it all, that one sentence remained at the top of the post. Quiet, unmoving, true. "I named him after you because I wanted him to know love, even if he never knew you." Mike closed his eyes. For the first time, he felt like maybe, just maybe, he had been loved all along. Mike didn't post anything else for the rest of the day. He didn't have to. The comments kept coming. A retired school teacher shared how she once found a letter her husband had written to the daughter they gave up for adoption when they were just teenagers. She wrote, "We were scared, but I kept the letter. When I finally found her, she said it saved her, even after all those years." Another message read, "My dad died thinking I hated him. I didn't. I was just too angry to tell him I missed him. I wish I had sent him the letter I wrote but never mailed." Mike scrolled slowly, heart clenching at the pain and beauty in every word. It was like a digital confessional, a community of strangers held together by the thread of silence they all once carried. And now, because of one delayed letter from 1985, people were speaking again. Healing. Later that evening, Mike walked outside. The small Oregon sky was wide and open. Stars blinked through faint clouds, and the street lamp hummed gently above the sidewalk. Keanu texted him, "Your mother would be proud." Mike stared at those 5 words. Simple, direct, and somehow heavier than the letter. He didn't respond right away. Instead, he walked to his workbench inside the shop and pulled out an old box, a place where he stored things that didn't have a home. Watches with missing bands, photos he found in bike baskets, pieces of metal that didn't match anything but felt too unique to toss. He slid the letter inside. Then, after a moment, added something else. A photo he had framed long ago. A blurry image of him as a kid, no more than 5, holding a small red wagon. He'd always wondered who took that photo. He'd always wondered why no one ever talked about it. Now he wondered something new. Had his mother kept it all those years, tucked inside a box just like this? He closed the lid slowly. Online, someone else had commented, "This letter made me call my mom." Another had written, "I printed it out. It reminded me of my grandfather. He never met his dad, but he talked about him like he still could." The wave kept building, not loud or dramatic, but steady, like rain on a roof, like the slow swell of a tide that no one notices until the shore has changed. Mike smiled to himself. Maybe this wasn't about finding someone anymore. Maybe it was about making sure no one else stayed lost. The next morning, Mike walked into the bike shop earlier than usual. The air was still cool, the windows slightly fogged. He turned the sign to open, even though he knew no one would be in for hours. The bell above the door jingled as he crossed the small floor, headed to the workbench, and paused. There, taped to the register, was a note, just a piece of printer paper. It read, "You helped me believe my father might have loved me. Thank you." No name, no return address. Just that one sentence. His hands trembled slightly as he read it again. The weight of it wasn't heavy. It was grounding. Keanu showed up 20 minutes later. No entourage, no cameras, no explanations. Just his usual quiet presence and a coffee in each hand. Mike held out the note. "I guess it's bigger than us now." Keanu read it, then nodded. "It was always bigger than us. We just made it visible." They sat outside on the shop's small wooden bench. Customers passed. A few people waved. Others walked by slowly, recognizing the man who had changed so many lives without ever raising his voice. After a while, Mike turned to him. "Do you think she ever knew that I made it?" "I think," Keanu said softly, "she hoped. And sometimes that's all a mother has." They sat in silence, watching the sky shift. Mike reached into his pocket and pulled out the original letter again. It was worn at the edges now, handled too many times. But he folded it carefully and slid it into an envelope. On the back, he wrote, "To whoever needs to hear this next." Keanu smiled as he watched him seal it. "Passing it on?" Mike nodded. "Someone's waiting, just like I was." As they walked back inside, Keanu glanced at the clock. "It's time," he said. "For what?" "For you to write your own first letter." Mike stared at the empty notebook beside the register, then picked up a pen and began. The rain came softly that morning in Los Angeles, as if the sky itself was whispering old stories waiting to be heard. Inside a quiet, modest community center, lined with folding chairs and faded banners, a new chapter was quietly being born. Keanu stood beside a table where a banner read, "Archives of Belonging, Letters No One Answered Until Now." It had started small, a simple idea born out of a moment that shook him to his core. He had seen firsthand how a lost letter, decades old, could awaken a lifelong silenced. Now, he wanted to make sure no message would ever go unheard again. The initiative was simple in design but monumental in purpose. A digital archive dedicated to letters written by those separated by war, adoption, displacement, or time. Anyone could submit a letter, real or reconstructed, remembered or reimagined. What mattered wasn't documentation, it was connection. And today, the first letters would be read aloud. Keanu hadn't planned on asking Michael to speak. He didn't want to burden him with more spotlight than he could carry. But Michael had asked first. "I want to be useful," he said a few days ago. "You helped me find my truth. Maybe I can help someone else find theirs." And so, as the folding chairs filled, Michael Reeves, once Mike Carson, stepped forward. His hands trembled only slightly as he unfolded the letter. He didn't read the entire thing. He didn't have to. He read the same line he had once posted online. "I named him after you because I wanted him to know love, even if he never knew you." The room was still, not out of obligation, but reverence. Then Michael spoke, not from paper, but from memory. "My mother didn't raise me. My father never knew me. But somehow, through one letter, 40 years late, I found both." He paused. "This archive isn't about reunion. It's about recognition. If no one ever answers your letter, that doesn't mean your story didn't matter. It just means the world wasn't ready to hear it. Until now." The applause that followed wasn't loud. It wasn't rushed. It rose like the tide, quiet, steady, and full of something heavier than noise. It was gratitude, released. After Michael stepped down, a woman in her 70s approached the podium. Her voice cracked as she unfolded a yellowed envelope. "My brother died in Vietnam. He wrote my mother a letter every week. We didn't know until last year that the final one never made it to her. It got stuck in a base mail room and only showed up when they digitized old boxes. He had written, 'Tell Mom I forgive her for not understanding why I left, and that I love her anyway.'" She swallowed the lump in her throat. She carried that guilt until her last breath. I just wish she'd known he didn't blame her. A man followed, no paper in hand, just eyes rimmed with memory. My adoption records were sealed until last year. I thought my mother didn't want me. Then I found the petition she filed when I was 3, fighting to get me back. She lost. But she tried. And knowing that changed everything. Throughout the afternoon, stories like these filled the room. Not of reunion, not of happy endings, but of belonging reclaimed. In the back, Keanu watched silently, his arms folded loosely, his eyes fixed not on the speakers, but on the listeners. He saw the way people leaned forward, nodding not just in empathy, but in reflection, as if pieces of their own past were clicking into place. Later, outside the center, a young man approached Michael as he was leaving. "You don't know me," he began, "but your story made me want to write mine. I haven't talked to my birth parents in 12 years. I used to think silence was easier than rejection, but maybe it's not too late to say something." Michael nodded, his eyes soft. "It's never too late to be honest, even if no one replies. Saying it still matters." The man smiled. "Thanks, man, really." As he walked away, Michael turned to Keanu, who had followed a few steps behind. "This archive," he said, "it's not just about the past, it's about what we do next." Keanu placed a hand on his shoulder. "And you're part of that now." Weeks later, the digital archive launched quietly. No press conference, no viral campaign. Just a simple website titled The Archives of Belonging, with a message on the homepage. For those who never stopped listening. Letters began to pour in. A veteran uploaded scans of his mother's wartime notes, all written on scraps of C-ration boxes. A woman shared a postcard from her brother, mailed the day before he disappeared in a hurricane. A father uploaded the sonogram photo his teenage daughter never saw before she was placed in foster care. The stories weren't neat, they weren't easy, but they were real. Michael became a frequent presence in the comments. He responded not with advice, but with affirmation. "I hear you. That matters. I carried silence too." He spoke on podcasts, quietly, intentionally. "We always think the truth will break us," he said in one interview, "but the truth is what makes us whole." And Keanu? He never made the archive about himself. He funded the tech, hired moderators, and made one small addition no one noticed for weeks: a scan of the original letter from June, uploaded under the title, "Delivered at Last." It was the archive's most read post. At the bottom, Michael had added his own note. "L didn't just carry my father's name, he carried my father's heart." And beneath that, just one line in italics. "Some people aren't lost, they're just waiting to be found." It was just past dawn when Mike stepped off the train in Washington, D.C. The morning air was crisp, the kind that carried the weight of memory in its silence. He hadn't slept much. The letter was folded neatly in his coat pocket, laminated now, though the ink had already faded into soft blue echoes. Keanu walked a few paces behind him, not as a guide, not as a shadow, but as a witness. They made their way to the National Mall, where the granite walls of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial stretched across the earth like a scar. The names carved into the stone shimmered faintly under the early light. Mike had seen it in pictures before, but in person it was overwhelming. A place of pain, a place of peace, a place that remembered. In his hand he held a small bronze plaque he'd had engraved. It read, "Michael Reeves, father, loved, missed, found too late but never gone." He knelt slowly, his breath catching in his throat. His fingers brushed the base of the wall just beneath the spot where names disappeared into polished stone. There was no official registry entry for Michael Reeves. Not here. His death had never been confirmed nor formally recorded in the theater of war. But Mike wasn't here to confirm loss. He was here to reclaim presence. Keanu stood a few feet back, letting him have the moment. Mike reached into his coat and pulled out the letter. The one written 40 years ago by a woman who died with no family, no answers, and no chance to rewrite the silence. He had read it a dozen times now, but still, the words hit differently every time. He unfolded it, looked at it, then slowly placed it beneath the plaque. A gust of wind tugged at the corner before it settled. Visitors passed quietly around them, some pausing, others not. An older man with a cane stopped briefly, nodded at Mike, then touched the wall and moved on. "I don't know what kind of man you were," Mike said softly, his voice hoarse. "But I know you gave her something, enough that she gave me your name." He closed his eyes, and for whatever reason, she waited. She hoped, even when it didn't make sense to. "I think maybe that's what love is." He wasn't crying, not exactly. The tears had been shed long ago, but there was a kind of stillness in him now, like he had finally set something down he didn't know he was carrying. Keanu stepped forward quietly and placed a hand on Mike's shoulder. No words were exchanged. None were needed. They stood together for a while longer, in the quiet presence of thousands of names, and one that had nearly been forgotten, but not anymore. The path away from the memorial felt heavier than the one that had led them there. Mike walked slower now, like each step carried the weight of decades, but also the strange new lightness of release. They found a bench shaded by a row of tall oaks, just beyond the reach of the memorial's quiet hush. Mike sat down, not to rest, but to reflect. His hands were still trembling slightly, not from nerves, but from something deeper. A reverberation of all the things he'd never been able to say, and all the answers he would never truly have. Keanu sat beside him, hands folded in his lap, letting the silence stretch. "I used to make up stories," Mike finally said, eyes still focused on the path ahead. "When I was a kid, about where I came from. Sometimes my parents were astronauts, or spies, or musicians who had to go into hiding. It was easier than thinking maybe they just didn't want me." Keanu nodded. "Stories help us survive before the truth is ready." Mike gave a small, dry laugh. "Yeah, but the truth, this truth, it's still strange. Like I opened a door and found both nothing and everything waiting for me." The morning sun filtered through the trees, dappling their faces in soft gold. "I don't know how to feel," Mike continued. "She named me after him. That means something. But I'll never know if he would have wanted to know me, if he ever tried. If he even knew." Keanu leaned forward slightly. "Sometimes the letter doesn't arrive in time, but that doesn't mean the message wasn't meant to." Mike turned his head to look at him. Keanu went on. "He might never have gotten her words, but the life she brought into the world, you, still carried them. You lived in the space between their choices. That's not nothing, Mike. That's legacy." A few children passed by with their parents, laughing loudly before growing quiet again in the shadow of the wall. "I wish she had told someone," Mike said. "That she had fought harder to keep me." Keanu didn't interrupt. "But maybe she did," Mike whispered. "And maybe life just didn't let her." He sat back, letting the truth rest where it was. Not resolved, not redeemed, but finally real. Keanu took a breath and pulled out his phone. "There's something I want you to hear. It's her voice." He played the digitized voicemail, a short, shaky recording from a home answering machine salvaged years ago. June's voice, crackly and uncertain. "Hi. I'm looking for Michael Reeves. If this is you or if you know him, please tell him June called. It's about the baby. He has a son." The message was dated 1985. Mike froze. The sound hit him like a wave. He clutched the bench edge, then covered his mouth. He didn't speak, not for a long time. But when he finally did, his voice was steady. She tried, and that made all the difference. They stayed on that bench until the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the gravel path. A breeze picked up, rustling the trees above them with a whisper like distant voices, soft, ancient, and forgiving. Mike stood up first. He didn't speak for a moment, just looked back toward the wall. "I think I'm ready to leave now," he said. "But I want to come back, not to mourn, just to sit with him, maybe talk a little." Keanu gave a gentle nod. He'd like that. They walked side by side through the grounds in silence. Mike held a folded copy of the letter, laminated now like the one he left behind. On the back, he had scribbled something earlier in the day. A single sentence. "Legacy isn't in blood. It's in the choice to remember." At the gate, a young veteran on crutches nodded to them. Keanu paused and greeted him with quiet respect, and Mike offered a soft, "Thank you." It wasn't lost on him that the man, wounded but walking, was a mirror of all the ghosts that haunted this place. Before they parted, Mike turned to Keanu. "You didn't have to do any of this. Why did you?" Keanu smiled, tired but warm. "Because the letter finally had somewhere to go, and because everyone deserves to know they were loved, even if it takes 40 years to hear it." Mike blinked away the tears that came again, unashamed now. Then he extended his hand, not for a handshake, but a quiet bond. Keanu took it without hesitation, and as they walked away in different directions, the memorial stood behind them, silent, still, and full of names. But somewhere among them now, beneath a small plaque and a laminated letter, there was a different kind of reunion taking root. Not in triumph, not in closure, but in truth, and in that truth, something eternal. Keanu sat quietly on the weathered bench, its wooden slats groaning softly beneath him as the late afternoon sun dipped low over the National Mall. The air was heavy with the scent of grass and old stone. Just a few feet away stood the new plaque on the memorial wall, gleaming in the warm light, simple but heavy with meaning. Michael Reeves, father, loved, missed, found too late, but never gone. The words shimmered slightly behind their protective lamination. Below the plaque, a neatly folded letter had been tucked into a clear case. It was the same letter that had started it all, the one June had written decades ago. Its paper was yellowed but preserved, the ink faded but still legible. Keanu glanced to his right. Lucas stood beside him, growing taller each year, a quiet soul just like the man he admired. The boy's gaze lingered on the wall. "Was that his dad?" Lucas asked softly, his voice careful not to disturb the hush surrounding the memorial. Keanu nodded. A father who never got the chance, but still left a gift. Lucas looked up at him, brows furrowed. "But how's that a gift if they never met?" Keanu turned his head slowly, letting the weight of the question settle between them like dust. "Because sometimes the gift isn't a person. It's knowing that person existed and cared, even if the world kept them apart." Lucas nodded slowly, taking that in. Then his eyes drifted back to the wall, where a young boy, maybe 10 or 11, stood on tiptoes, squinting to read the plaque. The boy was with his mom, who gently laid a hand on his shoulder. She wore a military widow's pin on her lapel. Her face carried the same kind of quiet that Keanu had come to recognize. A silence not of weakness, but of depth. The kind that only loss could carve. As Keanu watched, the boy turned and whispered something to his mother. She nodded, then hugged him tightly. He looked back once more at the name, at the letter, and pressed his small palm against the cool wall before walking away. Keanu exhaled. He hadn't planned to come, but when Mike told him the day and time he was going to place the plaque, something inside Keanu said he needed to bear witness. Not for publicity, not for politics, but for the same reason he'd read that old, yellowed envelope back at the Foundation's office. Because some stories don't end. They pass on, torch-like, to anyone brave enough to carry them. He closed his eyes briefly and heard the voices again. Mike's voice trembling as he first read June's letter, the way he said, "So he never left me." And Ray's voice too, though he never knew him, just a whisper through ink, "I never stopped breathing for you." And somehow, they were both here now, together. The wind shifted, bringing with it the distant sound of a military honor guard performing a salute in another part of the park. Keanu and Lucas sat in silence for a long moment, watching as more visitors passed the plaque. Some paused, others kept walking, but nearly everyone looked at it. Even if they didn't stop, their eyes lingered a moment longer than usual. Lucas finally broke the silence. "What happened to the man, Mike?" Keanu smiled faintly. "He's doing something beautiful now. He's helping others who lost their names, the ones who were never told where they came from." Lucas tilted his head. "Like a teacher?" "More like a witness," Keanu replied. "Someone who says, 'I was broken, but I still matter, and so do you.'" Across the lawn, Mike appeared. He was walking alone, no fanfare, no cameras. Just a man with his hands in his pockets and his eyes locked on the plaque. He paused in front of it, gave a long exhale, and knelt. For a while, he said nothing. Then he opened a small box from his coat and placed a silver dog tag inside the letter case, next to June's letter. Keanu recognized it. The original dog tag from Michael Reeves' service record. Where Mike had found it, Keanu didn't know. But it didn't matter. It was here now. Lucas watched as Mike stood and stepped back. Will he be okay? Keanu thought about it, about how fragile the truth can be, about how learning you were loved too late still mattered, about how Mike had carried the ache of abandonment for decades, only to discover it had been a misunderstanding wrapped in silence and war, and postal delays. "He'll never be the same," Keanu answered gently. "But sometimes, that's how we begin again." Lucas nodded slowly. "I'm glad he knows now." "So am I." Mike glanced over and saw them. A brief nod passed between him and Keanu. Nothing dramatic, just a quiet acknowledgement of everything that had been done and everything that still needed doing. Lucas stood, brushing off his jeans. "Can we go walk around the reflecting pool?" Keanu smiled. "Lead the way." As they walked, Lucas slipped his hand into Keanu's. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. Behind them, the plaque caught the fading sun, casting a long shadow across the stone. People passed it. Children pointed, veterans saluted, and one young woman took a photo and whispered to her partner, "That's new. That wasn't here last time." And still, the letter waited. Not for recognition, not for fame, but because someone, somewhere, might walk past that name, that folded paper, and see themselves in the silence. That evening, long after most visitors had gone, the memorial became quiet again. The wind settled. Streetlights hummed overhead. Somewhere in the distance, the low roll of thunder hinted at coming rain. Keanu and Lucas had left hours ago, but the image of them lingered. 2 generations walking side by side. And in their absence, another presence remained. Michael, Jr., still standing near the plaque. He didn't say a word. He simply stood, as if waiting for something. Or someone. Then a man in his 70s shuffled by. Veteran hat. Oxygen tube. He paused, read the inscription. "Michael Reeves, huh? I knew a Reeves in Nam. Good man," he muttered to himself. Mike turned to him. "That was my father." The man blinked, surprised. "You his son?" "I am now," Mike said. "He never got the letter, but I did." The older man gave a slow nod. "That counts for something." They stood in silence. Then the man tipped his cap and walked on. Mike watched until he disappeared into the dusk. Then, slowly, he sat on the bench across from the plaque. He didn't cry. Not tonight. Instead, he took out a small notebook and began to write. Not to his father this time, but to someone else who might someday read a forgotten letter. To someone like him. The words came slowly at first, then steady, page after page. His handwriting wasn't perfect, but the message was clear. You were never truly alone. Someone tried to find you. Someone cared. He tucked the notebook into his jacket when the first raindrop hit the page. He rose, nodded once toward the plaque, and walked away under the streetlight's halo. Behind him, the bench stood empty, but not silent. It held echoes. It held fire. And for those who passed by from that night forward, it held something else too. A reason to believe that even if the world forgets you, someone might still remember. The air was cool that morning in Washington, D.C., a soft breeze brushing across the memorial wall like the whisper of a name too long forgotten. Keanu stood near the back, quietly observing from beneath the shade of a sycamore. He wasn't there for a headline or an audience. He was just there to witness something sacred. A few steps away, Mike stood before the plaque he'd installed only hours before. His hands were still in his pockets. His eyes, though fixed on the inscription, seemed far away, searching for someone he'd never met. Someone whose voice he could only imagine through a page yellowed with time. Michael Reeves. Father, loved, missed. Found too late but never gone. The words weren't grand. They didn't need to be. Sometimes the most honest truth fit best in a few lines. A folded, laminated letter sat beneath the plaque, tucked in a waterproof case, a final bridge between past and present. People stopped to read it. Some wiped their eyes. Some simply stood still for a long time. Mike didn't speak. He didn't need to. Behind him, Lucas shifted beside Keanu, watching the scene. The boy's voice was soft. Was that his dad? Keanu nodded, his gaze steady. A father who never got the chance, but still left a gift. They stood in silence. Then a woman with her daughter approached the plaque. She leaned in to explain the story to her child, pointing gently to the name. The girl traced a finger along the edge of the letter and looked up, confused. Why didn't the letter come sooner? She asked. No one answered, because no answer would ever be good enough. But the question itself, that mattered, because it meant the silence had been broken. A few yards away, a teenage boy with a sketchpad began to draw the wall. Another man folded his cap against his chest. Across the plaza, an older veteran stood at attention. Keanu exhaled deeply. Not every story needs to be loud to echo. Sometimes, the words we never speak are the ones that stay the longest. Later that afternoon, Keanu and Lucas walked together along the edge of the reflecting pool. The ripples on the surface shimmered in the light, as though the sky itself was watching quietly. Lucas, now 13, glanced sideways at Keanu. Do you think that letter really changed his life? He asked. Keanu didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked across the water toward the memorial, where Mike was still standing. Alone now, but not lonely. I think, Keanu finally said, that letter gave him something nobody else could. Not answers, not closure, just permission. Permission for what? Lucas asked. To stop blaming himself, to finally belong. Lucas nodded slowly, as if trying to hold that thought still long enough for it to stick. Behind them, people were beginning to gather around a nearby pop-up exhibit. A team of volunteers had set up a digital archive station under a canopy. On the front, a simple banner read, "The letter that found its way." A few touchscreens were set up. Visitors were typing, uploading scans, reading stories from others across the country. Stories of reunions delayed, of families reconnected, of names once erased, finally restored. A woman in a wheelchair leaned forward to read a letter submitted by a Korean War veteran's granddaughter. A young man wiped tears from his cheeks as he uploaded the only photograph he had of his birth mother. The air felt different here, not just solemn, but sacred. Keanu watched quietly as Mike approached the exhibit. He didn't draw attention. He didn't speak into any microphone. But a volunteer turned and nodded to him with silent gratitude. Another handed him a letter that had just come in. A child's handwriting, scribbled in blue ink. Mike read it, closed his eyes, and placed it beside the others. Keanu turned back to Lucas. "It's like fire," he said softly. One spark, passed hand to hand. Lucas squinted. "You mean the story?" "I mean the truth," Keanu said. They paused again at the end of the walkway. Behind them, the stories continued to circulate, not just online, in whispers, in hand squeezes, in shared nods between strangers. As the sun dipped lower, casting long golden shadows across the marble steps, Keanu reached into his coat pocket and pulled out one last thing: a small card. He walked back to the bench where it had all started, near the Foundation's mailbox where the forgotten letter had first arrived. He knelt down beside the base and taped the card under the bench in a plastic sleeve. It read, "Sometimes the heart delivers what the post never could. Thank you for finding him, King." The card was unsigned, but it didn't need to be, because this was never about credit. It was about connection. In the voiceover, Keanu's voice returns, gentle, firm, and full of meaning. Sometimes, the most powerful words are the ones that never reach their destination. But when they do, years later, through someone else's hands, they can still change everything. A beat of silence. Then the soft swell of piano music as the screen fades to a black background with the following prompt. What would you do if a letter from the past changed your present? Share your story in the comments below. What kind of story should we tell next with Keanu Reeves? We're listening. Drop your ideas. A lost letter led to a son, but what happens when Keanu receives a call from a mother no one knew existed? The music fades, and the screen cuts to black. The final frame reads, "Inspired by true stories, driven by connection, told so no one gets left behind."